Večer i dobrodošli na 19. reviju malih književnosti u Booksu na predstavljanje malteških književnica i književnika. Ja ću sada preći na engleski, s obzirom da je službeni jezik večeras engleski. So once again, welcome to the 19th edition of the Festival Review of Small Literatures, which is this year dedicated to Maltese literature. And with us tonight are Nadia Mifsud, the poetess from Malta, living in France, going back and forth occasionally, and Adrian Grima, who is the guilty party for this selection of poets and writers from Malta. Welcome to Zagreb and welcome to our festival. I would like to begin first with the selection and your sin, Adrian, of making this particular selection. The task that you were asked to do was to present contemporary writers from Malta who are not translated into Croatian. The first selection was a bit longer, and then we discovered that some of the writers on the list had already been translated into Croatian, like Karla Schembrija, whom we actually had in Booksa. And can you tell us why particularly these writers and why did you choose them?
Okay. So, good evening. Thank you for having us. It's a real honor to be here to talk about Maltese literature. It's such a small literature, and thank you to you, Mika, and to Booksa for this honor and this joy. Maltese literature, I would say, is going through a renaissance from the late 1990s onwards, with Malta joining the EU and the possibilities to travel and to connect that created, but especially the internet revolution and the emergence of many young female writers who have really revolutionized the scene, and Maltese writers living abroad, writing about Maltese literature. This all has sort of changed Maltese literature to the core, I would say. It really changed the panorama, and especially the imaginary of Maltese literature. So when we say Maltese literature, I mean Maltese literature written in Maltese. Because of course there are people who write in English, as in the past there were people who wrote in Italian. The selection was difficult, especially in the case of poetry, because I would say that much of the innovation is in the area of poetry, and there are many interesting voices. So you have voices of writers writing in the late 1990s, but especially in the new millennium, and they all bring their different experiences, their different relationship with language, and with changing, revolutionizing the language and the relationship between words, and writers using nouns as verbs and verbs as adjectives and all of that. So in a way, I think for the older generation, the modernist generation from the late 1960s, some of whom still write today, I think this new generation, if you look at it a bit from their angle, I think this new generation was doing crazy things, even though they never presented themselves, these authors we have over here never presented themselves as being revolutionary. They simply wanted to find their own voice, to create their own voice, to write about a Malta that has changed so profoundly, so quickly, almost dramatically. So we didn't have divorce up until a few years ago, and now we have gay marriages. So.
And they are divorcing or not?
Yeah. I think there was a big sexual revolution, I think, also. Even though, of course, the stories we tell about our past and about our puritanical past are all myths. But I think there really was a revolution in the area of sexuality and the relationship with the body, and this comes out in the poetry. I think the way writers are writing their body, especially the women writers, because of course the female body has been so sexualized by male, patriarchal, heterosexual gazes. But of course Nadia and Leanne eventually can talk about that better than I can. So it was difficult to choose. So I went for one writer who is originally Moroccan and has been living in Malta for 18 years. He actually has a very complicated status in Malta. This is why he's not here today. He doesn't have a passport. But he writes wonderful Maltese, and he brings with him, you know, the richness of Arabic literature. Then you have two writers who live abroad. Karl, who lives in Nairobi now, but has lived in the Middle East, mainly in Palestine and also in Gaza. Nadia, who lives in Lyon. And then you have somebody who has Gioelea Galea's experience of writing from a very spiritual point of view. It's not the kind of literature I would personally normally read, but I felt that needed to be represented. I thought, sort of, this is also an important aspect of Maltese literature that must be represented.
Just to make sure for those who haven't read the book yet, because it's out today. It was out today. Joel is a priest, right?
Yeah.
And a hermit.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of... so this anthology is really exciting, I would say. All the things that you... the outline that you gave now, I would like Nadia to comment on that from your perspective of somebody who has lived in Malta, who has lived abroad for a long time, somebody who is a woman, and who has probably a completely different experience than Adrian had living in Malta.
Yeah, and I will also mention the language itself, because I think I'll speak about the language too. But yes, I remember as a girl growing up, so in secondary school, when we had our Maltese anthology and we were preparing for our Maltese examination, like when you open the anthology, you would see only men's names in it, with one or two exceptions. But those one or two exceptions, except maybe for one of them, Doreen Micallef, Doreen Micallef was very experimental. But still, most of the, he couldn't identify with what you were reading about women. And I would say the body, a woman's body, was relatively absent. Even not just in poetry, but even in prose. And when it was present, it was always being represented from a male perspective viewpoint. So, for example, if I wanted to read works by women authors, women writers, I had to look outside of local literature. That's how I started discovering, for example, French literature. I was very much into English literature, but locally we didn't have a lot of role models, one or two role models. That was it. And obviously, the language that they were writing it was not necessarily the kind of language that we were using either. So the Maltese itself, maybe we could not identify 100% with it because there were words that were being used that we would not use anymore in our everyday life. So it was about creating this space where talking about your experience as a woman, talking about the body itself, even bodily changes, you know, that a woman's life is actually very much linked to the bodily changes that she goes through. From the very, you know, adolescence, but then moving on into adulthood, possibly even motherhood, and then even now, for example, it's all about, you know, menopause and growing older and how your body changes and what does it mean, you know, becoming older. Those things are absent. Were absent. Nowadays, they're very much present. And so creating this space, it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same kind of revolution that is now going on in movies. For those of you who like movies, I'm sure that you've heard about male gaze, female gaze. It's exactly the same thing. You know, thinking about even what we used to call masterpieces nowadays, and viewing those masterpieces, and you realize, you know, how strong that male viewpoint is, even sometimes in the works of female filmmakers. And that shift is not easy to make, because we have absorbed so much this male viewpoint. So even sometimes when I read my own writings, especially with the writings, you know, certain early writings, I think, hey, well, this is also a male perspective I'm writing through. It's, you know, we've absorbed it so much. But to come back now to the question of the language, there is in Malta a kind of belief that because there are so few of us, that the Maltese language itself is very limited. That you cannot express yourself fully because, you know, we don't have enough the lexical, many lexical possibilities. And I think personally, this is something that I kind of came as a revelation to me when I started living abroad. When I'd been abroad for 1, 2, 3 years, I realized just how beautiful our language was and how big a space it actually offers in terms of sounds, in terms of rhythm, in terms of it's got a music that you don't find anywhere else, because, you know, it's a little bit of Arabic, it's a little bit of Italian, there's, you know. So even the language itself, I think that people who live in Malta, who have never lived abroad, they just don't realize all the possibilities that the Maltese language can give. And I think, for example, someone like Leanne, who you will hear yesterday, tomorrow, she feels that. She experiments so much with the language. She opens up new spaces in the Maltese language. And that is what the younger generation is bringing to Maltese literature.
I wondered, we talked a bit earlier, Adrian, how do these two, because you write in your introduction a lot about the modernist movement in Malta that was actually the second half of the 20th century, the nation-building movement, which was at the same time modernist but very nationalistic as well, because it was the new nation that had to be brought up. That generation is still alive and they still write, I presume. So how does this selection or these writers that you presented to us, this is only a kind of a glimpse into contemporary Maltese literature, how do they correspond? How do they coexist? How do they, what relation are they in? Do they, is it a rebellion against? Is it ignorance of? Is it dialogue with? What is the relationship between these two schools?
I think it's a dialogue. So when the modernist movement started writing, the young writers of the 1960s, they were in their 20s now, they were born just after the Second World War, which for Malta was very, very traumatic. The Second World War was a big trauma. and national trauma. When they started writing, the writers of the 1960s, this modernist movement, reacted angrily against the writers that came before them, even because they were very patriarchal, very conservative, very, very Catholic, the Romantic writers. So there was this big conflict, and there were controversies in the newspapers and all of that. This generation, the writers who started writing in the 90s and in the new millennium, I think they don't feel this animosity towards the modernist movement at all. I mean, Karl, for example, had a very, very good relationship with Mario Zopardi, who was one of the main figures of the modernist movement. We've all read Oliver Frigeri and Daniel Massa and Achille Metzi. These are the big names of the modernist movement, many of whom are still alive, or some of whom are still alive. One died recently, just a couple of days ago, Philippe Chibaras. So, in a way, this generation didn't feel the need to cut ties, they weren't the angry young men or young men and women of the new generation. They just needed a new language, they needed a new voice. They read the modernists, they were inspired by the modernists, and they decided this wasn't what they wanted to write. It might have been what they wanted to read, but not what they wanted to write, because Malta had changed, they had changed, and the transformation we went through, I think this has also happened in Croatia, in a very short period of time, was dizzying almost. It was disorienting. So they really needed a new language. This generation still needs a new language to deal with all this. A quick word about Maltese. Maltese starts in 870 with the arrival of the Arabs from Sicily. But in reality, the language probably Arabic establishes itself in Malta around the mid-11th century. It remains a spoken language till the 19th century. Then in 1839, there's the freedom of the press. So they start publishing papers in Maltese, they start publishing books and in English, Maltese, and Italian.
drafts would be multilingual. And for example, when people ask me, so I have many of my poems that have been rewritten in French because they're not translations. I cannot translate my own poems into French and keep to the same meaning, keep to the same images. Because initially, when I'm thinking about that poem, that image would be in French, but it sounds better if you use a different word or if you adjust the image a little bit, the metaphor a little bit.
Well, maybe it's now time to hear the Maltese poetry from you, translated by, in beautiful translations by Vladka Valentic. You send the list in an order. This is the droplets.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Tar. Bej nifsu ieħor ninfilsaw spazji li għamilna tagħna. Silenzji bħal noti mitwija biex insibuhom f'qiegħ tabut. Meta s-sema jitqalu ma nibqux narfu jekk il-qatar iċarċar tul wiċċna hux dmuħ jew xita. So maybe I should also say that this book, which is called Variazioni ta Skiet in Maltese, if I translate it into English, that would give you something like Variations of Silence. Most of the poems in this book were written either right before COVID or during COVID or after COVID. Most of them would be even during the first lockdown. So that is why silence comes into nearly every poem. These different forms of silences, you know, that comfortable silence, but also the uncomfortable ones, or the, you know, this overwhelming feeling that we had when, you know, when the pandemic started, like what's happening to us, what is going on, you know? And also sometimes the silence that was sadness or silence that is even despair. Not knowing what to say when you hear about, you know, a relative or a friend who passed away because of COVID. So that's why in many of these poems you're gonna find the word silence. Tana da skiet. Tana da skiet. Jimmansa l-grigalata kliem li tqum dvenven f'moħħna kull darba li għajnejna jiltaqu. Jiseffen il-ħolm, ibennin il-nifs, joffroq il-lejl minn nar. Tana dil-moħba. So as you can see there, the title of this poem is Plus 19, which means actually it's the 19th day from the start of the lockdown. So this was a kind of challenge. It wasn't an official challenge, but there was another very good friend of mine, a very good poet in Malta, who's called Simone Nguanes. And both of us, with other, because Adrian was doing it too, and even Leanne, I believe, was doing it a little bit. We were posting poems that we were writing. I couldn't write a poem per day, so sometimes it would be like every 2 or every 3 days. Our lockdown was different from the Maltese lockdown because we could only go out once a day, and we could only like go 1 kilometer away. It was like 1 kilometer away from home. In Malta, things were a little bit different. But that's why you got plus 19, which means the 19th day after the start of the lockdown. Ellissi. Tallimna niskutu kliem miles wisq li ma jmurx minn flok qawwilna qalbna jisqina iktar diqa. Tallimna nimirħu f'ħarsa nitgetsu fid-bissima. Tallimna nterqu f'wisat is-sema, nixxabtu max-xefaq. Tallimna noftqu l-gris inkennu l-kuluri x'imkien ġo fina. Tallimna narfu l-burdati tal-qamar, nisfnu fid-dalma mat-tibtib tal-kwiekeb. Tallimna nħollu l-oqiedi f'leħen xulxin, inġonġu l-ħin, niżlu kull nifs. Okay, so I was also experimenting with form, and I was writing quite a few reversible poems. So sometimes it would be poems that can be read top to bottom and then bottom top. Sometimes left, right, right, left. I had quite a few, and then I chose about 6, I believe, for this particular collection. So here goes, and this was the poem that I was trying to read today, and because it's got a lot of consonants and motifs, I might, stumble.
We won't notice.
Yes, you will. Ħlif għad ħanini ma naf li tlif timkien, unħallu l-blusa tmantnina, nerġu nbillu xuftejna f'dan laħna issa wawn, irridna, ninġarru mill-ġdid. Irridna, qabel ma l-ħamba tibda titħanxel fit-toroq u s-sikta tinstelaħ, qabel ma d-dalma tixxaqqa u l-ħolm jisfaloqhom, qabel ma tofroħ l-irtuba tan-nas. Qabel ma tofroħ l-irtuba tan-nas u l-ħolm jisfaloqhom, qabel ma d-dalma tixxaqqa u s-sikta tinstelaħ, qabel ma l-ħamba tibda titħanxel fit-toroq, irridna, ninġarru mill-ġdid. Irridna, nerġu nbillu xuftejna f'dan l-aħna issa wawn, unħallu l-imlusa tmantnina. Qatt ħanini ma naf nitlif flimkien, ħlif ħarstek. I'm pretending that I can read Croatian. Il-xixa. Tieqa fl-xixa u l-belt dlong tieħu biex roħra. Riħa ta' ġebel imxarrab. Hemda umda li xejn ma jħarbat ħlif it-tinwieħa ta' qattusa ċkejkna imkebba trejda waħda ma' koxxa ta' bieb. Ħosta li ma jqattar tal-kadusi jitektku, l-ispralli jitqansħu taħt saqajna. Xi darba nirrakkuntalek il-lob ta' dari fil-kantina ta' nanti, id-daħk sfrattat mill-fatati mistħajla. Fajnejk ukoll mistura mitħrafa. Ma kull pass li jimmiddu spallejna jitħabbu, abtit ta' zifna. Nefħarieħ dbanda l-fanali mdendla min-naħa l-oħra ta' triq, u magħhom fuq iċ-ċangaturi leqqina jitbanda lid-dawl, artab daqs leħnek. So the next poem, it's funny because this next poem exists in 2 different versions, if you want, and it's never really. So the first time I wrote this poem, because I also like playing around with paper and fabrics. So something like that. So it's actually 2 poems in one. And then when it came to including it in the collection, well, we couldn't have that in the book. So we had to go for something different, and we decided to actually include it in the form of a postcard with a photo. This photo is really special because it was taken by a friend of mine who I've known for 40 years. So we were in school together, Then we were boyfriend and girlfriend for 6 years, and we're still best friends. And it's actually one of the roads in our hometown, in our birth town. So it's really very special. So yeah, then the thing was like, how are we going to fit it inside the book? And we decided, let's do it in a postcard form. And I'm also experimenting here because 2 poems in one. Why I'm saying 2 poems in one? Because there are certain lines that are repeated in the 2 poems. Varjazzjonijiet ta' skiet. Xejn, għajli zattita l-ożor bejn riġlejna imħabla. L-aħħar qtar tan-nida jitfisset matruf il-ħġieġ, jisfen ma kun nefħarjeħ. Il-portieri jitħajmu fl-rtuba bajda tal-ewwel imriża u aħna magħhom imkebbin fi sħana ta' xulxin. Ħarira l fuq minn rasna, nifsijietna sospiżi. Dal-moment ma jeħtieġlux norqoh bi kliem. Biżżejjed inqiegħed il-nifsejja fin-wejqa ta' taħt gerżumtek biex nerġa' nsibek sħiħ. Inħoss il-ħajja tħabbat fl-arterji ta' onqok u jtini li nieħdok fejn l-arja għandha rieħa ta' baħar, fejn il-busbiż salvaġġ jikber bla rażan. Qatt rajt fjura tal-kappar, qatt doqt il-bajtar tax-xewk. Xejn, arsikta u mlusa. Għajnejk iżommu il-tiji dawk il-ftit sekondi żejda. Għajnejk mappa f'din lena ussa ġdida. Xejn, għajret armiċ tal-borra taħt saqajna. In-nida midmuma zibġa tkeff fil-bjuda, tfiddet l-irtuba ħadra tal-ħażiż. Ħarira l-fuq minn rasna, nifsijietna sospiżi, ħsibijiet maħruba, iħirsa ta' sigreti li baqgħu maħżuna u issa m'għadx jeħtieġ jingħadu. Ma jimpurtax li daqsejn ħadfu minn imriżaq xemx ċassa, iħufu bħal swaba bejn il-friej u l-skuk taċ-ċipress. Xejn, għajdin il-bjuda kompatta, il-bjuda li ma jistħoqilix tittebba. Għajnejk iżommu il-ti dawk il-ftit sekondi żejda, idejna fil-but jiznu it-toqol ta' skiet li trabba tul is-snin. And the last poem, it's actually, I call it one of my angry poems. I haven't read this one in Maltese for a few years. So I hope I'm not going to stumble because it's supposed to be read quite rapidly, actually. I'm going to try. I haven't even practiced it. Emigrania. It-tminja ta' filgħodu isħab rożoranġo jitmattar binas f'sema pjuttost safrani. Nodos rasi tqila f'imsarin il-belt inħalijat blani. It-tminja ta' filgħodu ir-rieħa ta' bewl frisk tinfidli mnifsejja, ġiġġu f'notti molawn wiċċhom mal-ħajt spalla ma' spalla, iniedu pubblikament tagħhom 4 madumiet fl-istonku tal-belt li għadhom kif birku blawrina. 19-20 sena għandhom żobb u konvinti li jistgħu jużawh kif u meta jridu. Nixtieq ninfidhom, installabhom mal-ħrafa tal-fallu potenti li temmulna sa minn ġkonitna saħansitrom mijietna ma' kull kuċċarina. It-tminja ta' filgħodu, madwar ġa hawn belt sħiħa tnaħna ħilħna ta' kull tip, kakofonija. It-tminja ta' filgħodu qed jittikawni jitkaken itektku ilebtu bħal ftiġrija fil-kurituri u t-turġien tal-metro. It-tminja ta' filgħodu bħal donnu qed idardarni jiddaħ kifur bħal vomtu minn ħalq 5 tfajliet rotob ġuġuwa miġbura għoċċa ħdejja. It-tminja ta' filgħodu u xarhom ħaddejhom xuftejhom difrejhom ġa mċalsa kull kulur. It-tminja ta' filgħodu it-tnalja tis-sokta tis-sikka madwar nasi kif jinfet l-istazzjon il-metro s-surdut u jġorni miegħu jaddassni fil-fond l-iktar fond imbagħad jobżoqni fid-dawl jammex tal-pjazza ċentrali.
Thank you. I think that I can relate now to what you were talking about, the language and the melody and the sounds of the language. But maybe we could talk just a bit longer about the graphic aspect of your poems, but also about the images and about the language that describe those images. You were talking a lot about the language, but my question for you, how does Maltese accommodate, or how do you find it, how do you find the words for the space that you want to carve out in this world? You use a lot of taboo images, you use a lot of words to describe them, so that's something quite explicit. So I was wondering if you could tell us something about that.
I don't know whether I use a lot of taboo images, to be honest. Once again, I don't think I'm that revolutionary. I don't really know what to, how to answer that question. It's really difficult. Once again, when it comes to the language itself, when it comes to the words themselves, I usually have a couple of sounds, and most of the time it's consonants, and I'm gonna try and use those consonants throughout my poems. Now in Maltese, there's something there that I have this obsession with. We have in Maltese a set of verbs where you have the same syllable, which is repeated twice. For example, you have chop chop, which means clap, but then if you put the consonants the other way around, it gives you patch patch. Chop chop, patch patch. We're using exactly, and patch patch means when when you blabbering, blah blah blah. So that is something that I'm trying to do with the language all the time, consciously. How does it fit in with the images that I want, especially if I'm talking about the body or maybe feminist issues? I don't really know how to answer that question. For example,
does it begin from the image or from the sound?
I think it used to begin from the image before, even from a theme sometimes. So, for example, I in quite a few of my works, I also talk a lot about sexual abuse, sexual harassment. I also talk about domestic violence, not necessarily because I have experienced all this myself, but if it's not myself, it's people who are close to me who have experienced this stuff. But I also talk about, for example, what it means like to give birth. Physically, what happens to your body when you give birth? What happens to your body after you give birth? Do we always have words for certain things in Maltese? No.
Okay.
So, for example, even faire l'amour, to make love in Maltese, we don't have a word for that. We don't have a verb for that.
Do you do it?
Yes, I think we do, or we wouldn't be here. But we don't have a word for that. Or, for example, even if you're talking about the female private parts, either you go for something that sounds really vulgar, or else you go for something that is,
medical.
Yeah, something that many people wouldn't even know what it means. You would find it in the dictionary, but the word is not something that we use every single day. So that is a problem. Even when I'm translating, for example, yeah. I don't know whether, I mean, you're much more of a specialist of the Maltese language than I am.
But maybe, Adrian, you could now join the conversation about the language itself, because it is a language that was influenced by many other languages, and that is obviously now carving a new chapter of the language, if I may say so, at least judging from your introduction, that these poets and these writers are basically bringing a new life into the Maltese language, which is being developed or changed constantly. But yeah, so can you give us a kind of a wider view of the language, but also can you comment on, just to make a transition from these issues to other issues that are tackled in this book, and that is the Maltese as a second language, and writing of body from a perspective of a hermit, or how the language changes in those works?
These are really difficult questions.
Sorry.
But just to take your last point, I think what Gioelea does in his poems, written from the perspective or from the experience of somebody who's living on a mountain in Italy with the snow around him, and in a completely deserted place, I think he takes his words and he puts them into unusual positions, and that gives them new semantic resonances. So it's not so much, in Gioelea's case, creating new words, it's more giving new functions to the words, putting them in unusual places, putting them, in very unfamiliar places, in order to create new meanings, new experiences, and new experiences for us as readers. So there's a lot to say about the language, but I'll just say just one thing, mainly. So Maltese comes from Arabic, as we were saying earlier, and it comes from the Arabic of the central Mediterranean, mainly from what would today be Tunisia. So Tunisia, Algeria, especially that area, but especially Tunisia. And this has been studied. So Arabic is based on consonants. In fact, they don't even write vowels when they write their language, which is something we struggle with when we study Arabic ourselves. But the thing is that with those roots of consonants, you can create other words. And you can create words which don't exist in the language, but which people who speak the language will understand. Because they know that kesere is kiser, to break. So you can create a word out of kesere, which people will recognize because they know that the root kesere, kiser, kisser, kisser, kisserna, kisserniko, they know where that comes from. So it's possible to create. And then so that's the Arabic part. Our language is considered a Semitic language. It's the first Semitic, official Arabic, Semitic or language of Arabic origin of the EU. It's one of the official languages, like Croatian. It's the only one which comes from this Semitic family of languages. But then there's the Italian and also the English part. So you can do things like, you can get a suffix from Italian, itata, and you can say something like, you can say spaghettata, so meeting to eat spaghetti. But you can also say henizrata, something like henizrias, doing something which is nice, which isn't nice. It comes from pig, hanzir, but then you can, and that comes from Arabic, and you can add an ata, and you can create a word like that. There are some yeah, and then you can take a word like to miss. Nadia saying nemesyak. So you take the verb to miss and you conjugate it in the way that you conjugate words which normally come from Arabic. So miss becomes nimmisja, I miss, and nimmisyak, which is the suffix from Arabic nimmisyak. Anyway, what my point is, there are 3 language families: Arabic, Italian, Latin languages, Sicilian, and English, which we can mix up together and create words with. I'm sure you have similar situations in Croatian. Every language has these possibilities. And what the new generation is doing is, it is, playing with these possibilities. The modernists had already done this before, but this is the new generation takes it to a new level by even changing the function of the word and all of that. And I think in a poet like Gioelea Galea, you get not so much the creation of new words or the use of vulgar language or language which you wouldn't normally put in poetry, but it's more the position of the word in relation to other words, and that creates the new experience for the reader. In the case of Murada Shuberta, you have these echoes of Arabic, because he comes from Casablanca. He reads a lot of course, his first language, his mother language, is Arabic. So there are these echoes, not only of Arabic, not only of the Arabic he spoke for most of his life before he came to Malta 18 years ago, but also of the works of Arabic literature that he reads, like Le Panneau by Mohammed Deep or Mohammed Shukri, sorry. These works, these great works of modern and contemporary Arabic literature, which continue to influence him. And this creates a new challenge for us, because to read Murada Shuberta in Maltese, you have to have some knowledge of the writers who are influencing him. The other thing I wanted to say while Nadia was talking, I think I mentioned it in my introduction. The new generation of writers, they talk a lot to each other in their poetry. They echo each other's work, they refer to each other's work, they challenge each other's work, literally. So this idea of intertextuality is really strong in this new literature. And even though the modernists worked together, I think they don't do it to the kind of level that the new generation does. The new generation, I think, works a lot more together.
So it's a community, a literary community.
In many ways, yes. Of course there are, different groups, and but yes, I don't think there would have been a Malta Mediterranean Literature Festival for the past 18 years had there not been this community of relatively young writers working together, listening to each other's work, challenging each other's work, talking to each other through their poetry.
I would ask you to first read the poetry and then leave some maybe space for the questions from the audience. But you will read first Gioelea's work, right?
They both happen to be Gioelea and Murada Shuberta, whose work I will read now. They both happen to be minimalist in their approach to poetry. So they're very, very short poems. Oh, I can't stand it. Gioelea Galea. Sospensioni. Għallejl sħiħ ma qatet xejn il-borra. Ma sepp is-silenzju faqanna tnabar ta' widnejna. U ġofina nkixfet natura sospiża bejn l-arfien u l-misteru. Mank nifs mill-frijaj taħt il-pis mill-wija, mank ċaqliqa. Bil-ħin friżat fuq xuftejna, kull kelma tmut qabel tinħolhom. Issa, aktar ma niżżajtek mill-kliem, aktar dert li sabiħa ruħ tiegħi. Biżejjed kienu werqa jew tnejn biex noħolmok bosk u ssir li fih is-siġar kollha. Imissa fejn hu dħul għall-bosk bla kliem fuq fommi? U fejn isbuħitek fil-ħenda ta' moħħi? Issa fejn int f'dal ġisem kiesaħ? Weġa. Lanqas imxarbaħ wejġek ma jeħlu mal-weġa tiegħek. Tinħelix tibki, tipprova tagħtiha forma għax għal xejn. Minflok, imxi s-silenzju sad-dlam u ħalli l-lejli kefnek fl-abbissi tiegħu. Id-dlam salvazzjoni għax m'hemmx għajnejn denji li jħarsu. Shall I do the two poems in English?
Maybe, yeah, of course.
Shall I?
Yeah, of course. The two poems will be read. The two poems will be read in English. They're not in this book. They're not translated into Croatian, but we will hear them in English.
Stone. This stone is dearer to me than roses. Sought more than water, found more than air. No thought in my mind is as clear. No words on my lips are as solid. Intimate this stone, quintessential, like this pain that you touch alone and weigh alone. Now there are two poems. This is the last poem by Gioelea, and this is an elegy to his mother. And there's another poem about Murad's mother, so I thought it would be nice to elegy to my mother. Your pupils I knew as the sea. I knew them as waves. I knew them as a ripple. I knew them as a blueness spreading of love over me, a reclined coast. Suddenly now, your eyes have emptied, and from here to the horizon, there is nothing but drought and exposed rock. And now, there you are. Your eyes blank, and now there's the coast, no longer a coast. So this is Murada Shuberta, and his first poem is about capitalism, and it's dedicated to a woman called Miriam Patch. So a quick note about this. Every one of the new generations of writers, new generation of writers, is writing about this issue of construction in Malta, of overdevelopment, of overconstruction, of spaces being taken over by tall buildings, and I was going to say it's a mess, but I'm not supposed to say that. So, and it's really affecting people's lives in a very dramatic way. And some people say that is why young people are leaving Malta at the moment, because they can't take it any longer. So in a way, it's the result. It's not in a way. It's definitely the result of this rabid capitalism that has taken over. And Miriam Patch she's not the only victim of this rabid capitalism and this lawlessness, because it is lawlessness. But she's very much a symbol of this situation. There was somebody else who died afterwards, Jean-Paul Sophia, a young man of 19, 20. But Miriam Patch basically died because they were building a new block next to her house, and the family kept saying, "Look, this is dangerous. You're not being careful enough. Our house is going to fall," and it fell, and it basically killed her. So kapitalizmu lil Miriam Paċ. Iju tistenna t-teżżiża li jmiss. L-asfura tal-bejt it-tama li n-nejbit tal-gaffa jagħtuha l-aħħar ċans ta' għanja. Toħlom ħolma, tħaddan il-frieħ. Kull flaxija l-aħħar tħaddina. Dejjem l-aħħar tħaddina. I always joke with Murad that normally, Arab literature, Arabic literature is known for being very long. You go to these festivals in the Arab world and the poems go on forever. And he's the exact opposite, So I worked a lot with Murad in this project. Now we're working on his very short stories. And it's incredible. So his poem starts with 12 lines. Then goes down to 11. He says, no, I think this is extra. 10 lines, 9 lines, 8 lines. It's this process of continuous reduction. Also because he believes a lot in what the readers can do with words, with their own experiences. Ibdnub tiegħi. Rit narani fil-mera. Bizbal, dawar tal-lejn in-naħa tagħhom. Minnu fih, qabdu li rasi u tefawa taħt il-giljottina. Għax ġeltom jaraw lilhom infushom. Kif inhuma. Armla. Nistaqsi li l-nifsi, kif setet li tgħix mingħajr il-maħbub tagħha? Kif kienet fis-sebħ qisha warda bisita n-nida? Osservajta fil-għaxija. Kienet tiġbor il-fattizzi tiegħu minn fuq wiċċna. L-bnieħe, il-fom, il-bissima rqiqa, dawk l-għajnejn maqarba, konna aħna missieri. On the last two poems, kaċċatur fallut. Mhix kaċċatur. Ma nħobbx l-isparar, niddejjaq nara x-xeni tad-dem, mbagħad bis-sentiment irqaq. Ma nafx fetti li d-darba. Beledni d-dalma tal-ġungla u qalbi sabet ruħa fis-center. Dħalt fost is-siġar u d-dlam, imbagħad irġajt lura. Inkaxkar priża waħda. Qalb miġruħa. And this is perhaps my favorite from this group of poems. Pupa. In Maltese, when you say pupa, we use it a lot with young girls. So, very young girls, children would say, "Oh, pupa." So it's a term of endearment. He chose affection. Pupa could also be, a very beautiful woman. Dik pupa, she's so beautiful.
We also use that.
The same word,
yes.
Literally, pupa.
Yes.
No.
Yes, we do. In Dalmatia, we do.
Pupa.
Yeah, pupa.
Really?
In the same meaning.
How do you use it?
Pupa.
Pupas.
But it means doll.
Yes.
Like in everyday language.
Doll and a beautiful young woman and a small girl.
Wow.
It's the same.
Yes.
So perhaps we both got it from Italy.
From Italian, of course.
Absolutely. So there are all these levels, of course, in this poem. They're all intertwined. They're all in dialogue with each other. Pupa. Pupa. It-tifla qalet lil pupa tagħha toħroġ mid-dar pupa. ibqa' miegħi. Barra qtilu erda. L-ajruplani qed iwaqqgħu bombi velenużi, il-ħajbur swied u firxet ir-riħa tal-mewt. Il-pupa għafsetit it-tifla u bkiet.
Thank you. Maybe this is the moment when you want to ask questions. Anybody? I was told that if you let the audience be sitting in discomfort long enough, they will ask a question. But I won't do it to you. So my last question will be about literary festival, actually, that you mentioned now, and the generation that kind of was simultaneous to the festival. I would say that it is the generation of the festival, or the festival of the generation.
Yes, the second.
So yeah, so it's a beautiful festival that takes place at the end of August every year, and it brings. It's a Mediterranean festival, but it brings writers from all over, not only from the Mediterranean. So I would ask you both, how did it come about, and why is it still on?
Okay, so I will answer the first question, and Nadia. So I was involved in the beginning of the festival, and I was kind of the artistic director until 2018. And I worked with this wonderful group of people who now continue to run the festival, including Nadia, Leanne, who's director of the festival now, and others. So basically the festival started because we really felt the need to connect with other writers. Me personally, but not only myself, I think I really felt the need to connect with the writers who were writing around me in Sicily, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Greece, in Croatia, in Slovenia, in Morocco, because we had no contact. We would know exactly what's coming out in New York tomorrow, but we wouldn't know who some of the better known writers in Sicily are 60 miles away, 96 kilometers away. So it felt so so false, no, so fake. You know, I mean, we're in the Mediterranean. Why aren't we listening to Mediterranean voices? Why aren't we talking to Mediterranean writers? So that's how it started, basically. And I think many people still associate us with the fact that we get Arabic language writers at our festival, because it was so unusual at the time, even though our language comes from Arabic, even though you say the word God in Maltese is as Allah. So we're so close to the Arab world, and yet there's nothing of the Arab world in most of our culture. So I think it was this need to connect, to be inspired, to inspire, to be heard, to be somewhat, to put ourselves on the international map somehow. And it's a small festival, as you know, very small festival. So at its peak, it used to invite 12 writers, literally 12 writers. But they live together for a week and they translate each other's work, and that's transformative, literally. It transforms the individuals and it transforms what happens on stage completely. It's a completely different experience. And we're really proud that some of the writers who came to our festival have won the Nobel Peace Prize, Abdulrazak Gurnah, the Pulitzer, and so many other, you know, Khaled Khalifa, who sadly left us a couple of days ago, was in Malta for 2 months. So Nadia can tell you a bit more about the festival and what's been happening in the last few years, and also the translation workshop which he runs, which is the coordinator.
Why is it still on? Because it's necessary. I think it's as I think the one thing that makes it different from many other festivals. It's not the only festival actually who has a translation workshop, which is part and parcel, goes with the festival. So the process starts from before the festival. So a few months before, we contact our guest writers. We ask them to send us a sample of their work. It's distributed among all the writers taking part, and they start translating before they actually come to Malta. And then when they are in Malta, they kind of fine-tune their translations, but they're also listening to each other and getting the rhythm, getting the music right, maybe even because most of the translations are actually, if it's a language that we don't speak. For example, we've had people from Iceland or even people from Croatia. So obviously we're working through a bridge translation, which is most often an English translation. So there might be differences between the English translation and the original version, and that's where they actually sit together and they're talking about, why did you choose this word? What does it actually mean? Does it have a double meaning? What about the sounds? And what happens then on stage is that we get performances. So we can have something, that is very close to a polyphonic performance sometimes, and I think that is a very unique experience. And each festival, each edition has its own magic. Something happens in the last, I would say, in the last day, something happens, always happens. But it's necessary. Why is it necessary? Because, as Adrian said, this is also about networking. It's also about friendships. You strike friendships with people. It's also about getting your work translated into a language, and then you can use those translations if you are invited to a festival, for example. Sometimes it ends up in collaborations too. Between different writers. We had that. So yeah, it's a fantastic experience. It's also necessary, I think, because we get to hear literally different styles. So, for example, in the past few years, we have been putting an emphasis, and I'm doing this because Leanne might tomorrow speak a little bit more about it. She's the artistic director of the festival right now. But LGBTQ issues, which in Malta is still, something rare, spoken word. So we still, and this is new. So even for our audience, it's a new experience. Yes, we have internet. But this is different because you can actually speak to the poets. We have workshops. We had Joel Taylor this year, the big voice right now in the UK, and we had a writing workshop with her. Fantastic experience. So yeah, it's necessary. And well, unfortunately, we're struggling for funding right now.
As always. As we all do.
Yes, but. Yeah,
but you survive.
It's a proud independent festival, and in the current climate, that's not acceptable for the powers that be. So,
yeah. Well, I hope that it will last for many years to come. I'm glad that you actually mentioned late Khaled Khalifa. He was in this festival 5 years ago, and it was the Arabic writers that were first translated into Croatian because of this festival, which is, as you can see, very small. But I thank you very much for keeping it alive, and I thank you very much for networking, because if it hadn't been for that festival, you wouldn't be here in this festival. So if you don't have any questions, I would wrap up. Thank you, and announce our two guests tomorrow. Oh, there is a question.
Yeah, I want to ask, I might have difficulties formulating it, but do you think that Maltese literature and poetry, and especially like the spread of it, and making it more known, and even translating it, could be transformative, especially in regards to refugees, and like these stigmatizations of refugees, in showing like that there's a similarity, or there's a point where like Italian and English and Arabic meet naturally?
I think we're all here because we believe in literature, and because we believe that literature is not just literature, it's about our lives, it's about our relationships, it's about how we live, how we talk to each other, how we listen to each other, how we notice other people. We're not just here because we want to share our technical abilities. We're here because we believe literature can change us and those who come into contact with it. So this is a really important theme that you're mentioning, the experience of immigrants, as Murad is. Murad, yeah, the complications of his status in Malta are related to the fact that he came to Malta on a boat, and he was one of the lucky ones who didn't drown in the Mediterranean because of our indifference, or the indifference of those who should be saving people's lives, not turning their back. And what literature does is it tells the stories that our world, full of words and full of statements and full of big marketing strategies, won't tell. These stories that need to be told, and we need to find the language to tell these stories. Because how does Adrian, who has never been in the middle of the Mediterranean at night on a boat full of people, some of whom can't swim, with these big waves, not knowing whether I'm going to survive the next minute. Some Syrian friends of ours, for example, lost 3 of their children in a famous incident in which many people lost their lives. They lost their 3 children. So how do you tell their story? They're great friends of ours, Ayad and Dania. How do you tell their story? How does Adrian, how does Nadia tell their story? What can language do? On the other hand, is it in a way, if I'm not going to tell their story, or what am I writing for? I mean, what's the point? So I'm sure that to go back to your question, I'm sure that literature will change the lives of people who want to read with an open heart and an open mind. And I'm sure it has done to many people. But it's not easy, and it's a choice, because as we know, literature is not what is on the paper. Literature becomes an event when it's read, and it's read by a human being with their own experience, with their own everyday life, with their own ideas. So it depends on the reader, essentially. Essentially, at the end of it, it's the reader who writes the work, ultimately, as you know. So, but I'm sure that literature offers this possibility. I don't know whether...
Yeah, I agree.
Once again, I think as a writer, yes, you always ask yourself this question: am I entitled to deal with an issue like that? You know, as Adrian was saying, I have never experienced that myself. I can empathize, and you do ask yourself your question: should I write about this or not? But once again, it's about creating this space, I think, and trying to... they lend us their stories. When they tell us their stories, it's a gift that they're giving us somehow. And the question is, do I have the right, or is it even a duty? So, yeah. It's not an easy question. It's not an easy question. How far does, how big is the impact? You can never tell, but as you know, even if it touches just one person, I think that's already something.
The whole world.
Yeah.
And these stories need to be told, and they need to be told in Maltese, because when they're told in Maltese, they enter in a very aggressive way into our to our consciousness as human beings. We can't say, "No, this is written in English. This is not my experience. This is written in French or Arabic." No, if it's written in Maltese, I think it enters our consciousness, and then we can't hide anymore. We can't turn our back, but we're turning our back. We can't say this is not ours. This is not our story. When Walid Nabhan, who's a Palestinian Jordanian writer who famous in Malta, who writes in Maltese also, when he writes about his experiences, you cannot say, "Oh, this is nothing to do with me." Now he's inside, and he's forcing us to look at ourselves.
I would say even if there's a reader who is resisting that, their resistance is already a reaction. It's better than nothing. Because if they're resisting that much, it means that you're touching upon a sore, something sore there.
Thank you for this question, and I think this is a beautiful note to finish on. That literature is really transformative, and that it can change us for better, hopefully for better, not for worse. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.